All right, so today we're diving into The Courage to be Disliked, this book by Alfred Adler.
Yeah.
And now this isn't like your typical self-help book.
Right.
It's really more like philosophy meets psychology,
Mm-hmm.
and it really challenges like some conventional thinking about, well-being and happiness and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think what's really fascinating is that Adler, even though he was working around the same time as Freud and Jung, these giants,
Right.
had a completely different take on things.
Yeah.
He wasn't so focused on the past and how it shapes us, like the classic Freudian.
Right. Yeah, the whole past traumas determine your future thing.
Exactly.
Adler kind of throws that out the window.
Yeah, he basically says that we are not, victims of our past.
Yeah.
We are driven by our future goals and aspirations.
So this concept of teleology.
Teleology, exactly.
Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, it sounds very complex.
Yeah, it does.
But it's really the idea that, we're not driven by the baggage we're carrying from our past, but we're actually pulled forward by our future goals and aspirations.
So it's not that our past experiences don't matter,
Right.
but they don't have to dictate our future.
Exactly.
That's pretty empowering.
It is. Yeah, very much so. And the book gives this great example of a guy who's, afraid to leave his house.
Oh, wow.
And so, kind of the classic Freudian approach would be to, delve into his childhood and see, what happened to him.
Right.
That made him this way. But Adler would say, okay, maybe something happened in the past that contributed to this fear, but what is the current goal that this behavior is achieving?
That's so interesting.
Right. So maybe he feels safe staying inside.
Right.
Or maybe he's avoiding something out in the world. Or maybe he's getting attention from his loved ones by acting this way.
Interesting.
So it really shifts the focus from, digging into the past
Right.
to looking at the present moment and what's the function of this behavior right now.
That's such a different way of looking at things.
It is.
And it kind of makes you question. I think all of us have those like go-to explanations for our own behavior.
Right.
Oh, I do this because of this thing that happened to me when I was a kid or whatever.
Absolutely.
But this is almost like we're choosing how our past affects us in a way.
In a way, yes. And I think that's one of the most empowering things about Adlerian psychology is that it gives us back our agency.
Right.
It says we have more control over our lives than we realize. And another really interesting example the book uses is about anger.
Okay.
And this one really blew my mind too. Adler says that anger is not something that we lose control of.
Okay.
It's actually a tool that we consciously choose to use
Interesting.
to achieve a goal.
So you're saying like when I snap at my partner after I've had a long day,
Right.
I'm not actually overwhelmed with anger. I'm
Yeah.
choosing to use anger to maybe get their attention or...
Potentially, yeah. I mean, it's a radical idea, right? Because we think of, these emotions as these powerful forces that overcome us and that we have no control over. But Adler says no. We're actually using them strategically, whether we're conscious of it or not.
Wow.
And the book uses this example of a mother who's yelling at her daughter on the phone.
Oh, gosh.
And then another call comes in.
Right.
And she instantly switches
to
this calm and pleasant tone. So clearly she wasn't truly consumed by rage. She was using that anger to control the conversation with her daughter.
Wow. That's a little unsettling.
It is a little bit.
But also incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
It makes you kind of rethink what other emotions we might be using strategically and not even realizing it.
Absolutely. And I think, it really challenges this whole narrative that you've been taught that emotions control us.
Right.
But it gets even more challenging because the book also suggests that we might sometimes dislike ourselves on purpose.
Okay, now that sounds a little crazy. Why would anybody intentionally put themselves down?
Well, it's about self-protection.
Okay.
So holding on to self-dislike can be a way to avoid certain situations or challenges.
Oh, so it's easier to say I'm not good enough than to risk failure or rejection.
Exactly. It's like setting the bar low.
Right.
So we don't have to deal with the disappointment of not reaching it.
Right.
And the book talks about this woman who had this debilitating fear of blushing.
Oh, my gosh.
But when you dig deeper, it turns out that fear was preventing her from taking a risk. Which was confessing her feelings to someone she liked.
Oh, so her fear was actually a way to protect herself.
Exactly.
From potential heartbreak.
Yeah.
Like self-sabotage disguised as a phobia.
It's very interesting, right?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how many of our, perceived shortcomings are actually these elaborate defense mechanisms to avoid putting ourselves out there.
So if we're not supposed to be dwelling on the past or using our insecurities as shields, what's the healthy way to deal with We all have these feelings of inferiority.
We do.
What's the healthy way to deal with that?
Right. Well, Adler believed that feeling inferior is a normal part of the human experience.
Okay.
It's not something to be ashamed of or to try to eradicate.
Interesting.
In fact, those feelings can be a powerful source of motivation.
So that's so different from like the positive affirmations approach that we hear so much about these days.
It is.
It's not about pretending we don't have those feelings. It's about using them constructively.
Exactly. And, I think a lot of the self-help advice that's out there today is about, getting rid of your negative thoughts and, only focusing on the positive.
Right.
But Adler says, no, those feelings of inferiority are natural.
Right.
They're part of what makes us human, and we can actually use them as fuel for growth.
So there's a difference, though, right, between healthy feelings of inferiority
Yes.
and what he called an inferiority complex.
Absolutely, because sometimes those feelings can spiral out of control
Right.
and really hold us back. So, what's the difference?
Yeah.
I think a good way to think about it is that, feeling inferior can motivate you to learn a new skill or work towards a goal. It's a springboard for growth.
Right.
But an inferiority complex keeps you stuck.
Okay.
You start to believe that you're inherently flawed or incapable, so you don't even try.
Oh, so you just give up.
Right. And then on the flip side of that, you have the superiority complex.
Right.
Which is where people overcompensate for their insecurities by acting arrogant.
Right.
Or putting others down.
Yeah, so it's almost like both extremes are rooted in that same
Absolutely.
like lack of self-acceptance.
It's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
It's just different ways of confronting those uncomfortable feelings of inferiority.
So if we're not supposed to be striving for superiority, then what is the goal?
Right.
Like, where does happiness come in all of this?
Well, Adler believed that true happiness comes from feeling like you belong and that you're contributing to something larger than yourself.
So it's not about being the best or outdoing everyone else.
Right.
It's about working together towards a common good.
Exactly.
That kind of goes against our culture's obsession with competition, though, doesn't it?
It does. And, think about how much pressure we put on ourselves and on others
Right.
to be number one, from a very young age.
Right.
We're taught to compete and compare ourselves to others. But what if we could let go of that constant need to compare and compete?
It makes you wonder if all that striving for superiority is actually getting in the way of true happiness and connection.
I think it definitely can be. And, one of the most powerful concepts in the book that kind of addresses this is this idea of the separation of tasks.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What's the separation of tasks all about?
So it boils down to this focus on what you can control and let go of everything else.
Oh.
And specifically, it's about recognizing what's your responsibility and what's someone else's responsibility.
So like setting boundaries in relationships.
Yes, but it goes beyond just saying no. Yeah. It's about understanding that you can't control other people's thoughts, feelings, or actions. You're only responsible for your own.
Oh, I can already see how this could be a game changer.
It is.
Especially in those relationships where we tend to get overly involved or take on other people's burdens as our own.
Right. And, it's not about being cold or uncaring. It's about recognizing that we can't live other people's lives for them.
Right.
We can offer support and guidance, but ultimately they have to make their own choices. And the book uses this example of a philosopher who was struggling with his, difficult relationship with his father.
Okay.
And he realized that he couldn't change his father.
Yeah.
He could only change how he reacted to his father, so he could choose to detach from the need to fix him.
Wow.
Or to make him see things his way.
That must have been so liberating to finally let go of that responsibility.
It is.
That wasn't his to carry in the first place.
Right.
But what about those situations where we feel obligated to help, like with our parents or our children?
Absolutely.
Does this still apply?
It applies to all relationships, even the most challenging ones.
Okay.
It doesn't mean we stop caring or supporting the people we love. It means we recognize that everyone has their own path to walk their own lessons to learn.
Yeah.
We can offer guidance and support, but ultimately it's up to them to make their own choices.
I think this is where things might get a little controversial for some people.
Yeah.
Because it goes against some pretty deeply ingrained beliefs.
It does.
About family duty and obligation.
Yeah, and there's this idea that we have to, fix our parents or that we're responsible for our children's happiness. But Adler would say, no, we can't live other people's lives for them.
So this all ties back to the book's title, doesn't it?
It does.
The Courage to be Disliked.
Right.
Because if you're truly living according to your own values and taking responsibility for your own life,
yes,
you're not going to please everyone.
You're not, and that's okay.
Right.
And that's where the real freedom lies, in the ability to say, this is who I am and I'm not going to apologize for it.
It sounds like a pretty radical way to live,
It is.
but also incredibly empowering.
It is. And, it's not about being reckless or hurtful.
Right.
It's about living authentically, even if it ruffles some feathers.
Okay. I'm definitely feeling the need to pause and process all of this.
Yeah.
Before we go any further, there's just so much to unpack.
Take your time. These aren't easy concepts to grasp.
No, they're not.
But they have the potential to be truly transformative.
Yeah, we've only just scratched the surface of the courage to be disliked. But I already feel like I'm seeing the world through a new lens.
I think that's a good place to stop for now.
Okay, so we'll have to save the rest of this deep dive for next time.
That's good.
But until then, why don't you think about where you might be holding yourself back by trying to please everyone.
Right.
Or taking on responsibilities that aren't yours to carry.
Yeah, good advice.
You might be surprised at what you discover.
Absolutely.
All right, until next time.
See you then.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dive a little deeper into the courage to be disliked. You know, that last part about the separation of tasks
Right.
really got me thinking.
Yeah.
I can see how, letting go of that need to control or fix other people
Right.
could be like incredibly freeing.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a challenge.
It is. It's a practice, not a perfect.
Right.
But I think, even starting to recognize those moments when you're taking on tasks that aren't yours is a huge step.
Yeah. So where do we go from there?
Yeah.
What happens when we actually start, shedding those burdens and focusing on our own lane, so to speak?
Well, that's where things start to get really interesting because the book argues that, true happiness comes from this sense of contribution.
Yeah.
The feeling that you're making a positive difference in the world, but it's not about, seeking recognition or praise for that.
Yeah, we touched on that briefly last time.
Right.
But I'd love to unpack it further because it seems like, so much of the self-help advice these days is all about focusing on yourself.
Right.
Your own goals, your own happiness.
Your own self-improvement.
But Adler's saying that true fulfillment comes from something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, it's a radical shift, right?
It is.
But think about it. When you do something kind for someone else, even something small, how does that make you feel?
I know exactly what you mean. It's like an instant mood booster.
Right.
But I will admit, sometimes those good deeds come with an expectation of something in return, whether it's a thank you or just like the feeling that, I've scored some good person points or whatever.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Adler cautions against.
Yeah.
He says that, when we're motivated by that need for recognition, we're not truly contributing, we're performing.
Oh.
And that can actually lead to feelings of, resentment and emptiness.
Right.
Because our focus is on what we're getting, not what we're giving.
So it's about shifting that motivation from, look at me, I'm so helpful,
right,
to how can I be of service without any strings attached?
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be, some grand gesture.
Right.
It's the everyday acts of kindness that truly make a difference.
Right.
Holding the door for someone, offering a listening ear,
right,
volunteering your time at a local charity.
It's about seeing those little moments as opportunities to contribute rather than just, checking things off our to-do list.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. When you start approaching life from that perspective, you start to notice those opportunities everywhere.
Oh, interesting.
It's like you've suddenly tuned into a different frequency.
Right.
And you're seeing the world through this lens of contribution.
Okay, that makes sense. But it also kind of raises a question for me.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times I think, those feelings of inferiority or inadequacy that we were talking about earlier can actually prevent us from contributing. We might think like, who am I to help?
Yeah.
I'm not good enough, smart enough, experienced enough.
Right.
How do we overcome that inner critic?
Well, that's where self-acceptance comes in.
Okay.
It's about acknowledging your strengths and weaknesses, your flaws and imperfections.
Yeah.
And saying, this is me and I'm enough just as I am.
It sounds so simple.
It does.
But it's like one of those things that's so much easier said than done.
It is. It really is.
Because we're constantly bombarded with these messages, telling us we need to improve, achieve, be more.
Absolutely.
How do we drown out that noise and accept ourselves as we are?
It's an ongoing practice.
Right.
It's a conscious choice that we have to make every day. But the book argues that, true self-acceptance is the foundation for everything else. For contributing meaningfully, for forming healthy relationships, for living a life of courage.
It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly.
You have to fill yourself up with self-love and acceptance before you can truly give to others.
Right. And when you start operating from that place of self-acceptance,
Yeah.
you're no longer seeking that validation from the outside world.
Right.
You're not doing things to impress people or to get their approval.
Yeah.
You're acting from a place of genuine generosity and compassion.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Yeah.
Self-acceptance, contribution, the separation of tasks,
Mm-hmm.
the courage to be disliked.
It's all interconnected.
Yeah, they all kind of like support each other
Right.
and create this framework for a more authentic and fulfilling life.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a challenge to put these ideas into practice
It is.
in a world that often tells us the opposite.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But, the book offers a very different way of thinking about our journey through life.
Right.
It's not about, following some predetermined path or reaching some specific destination. It's about embracing the present moment and creating meaning
Okay.
through our actions and interactions.
That reminds me of something we talked about earlier, this idea of energial life versus kinetic life.
Right. Yes.
Can you remind us of that distinction again?
Yeah. So kinetic life is all about striving, achieving, getting to that next goal.
Right.
It's future focused, always looking ahead to what's next.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas energial life is about finding joy in the present moment, in the process of doing, rather than just the achievement itself.
So it's the difference between being so focused on reaching the top of the mountain
Right.
that you forget to enjoy the climb
Exactly.
versus savoring every step, every view, every challenge along the way.
Yeah, and that shift in perspective can make all the difference in how we experience life. It's not about denying our goals or ambitions,
Right.
but about finding a balance between striving and being present.
It's about bringing that same sense of presence and intention to our everyday lives.
Exactly.
Whether we're, washing the dishes or having a conversation or pursuing a passion project.
Yeah. It's about finding the dance in the mundane.
I love that. Yeah. And here's the thing, like when we start living from that place of presence and contribution, the goals and the achievements often take care of themselves.
I think so.
It's not that we stop caring about success.
Right.
It's that our definition of success expands to include the richness of the journey itself.
Absolutely.
So it's not about, abandoning our goals. It's about approaching them with a different mindset.
Right.
It's about finding the joy in the process, the connection in the community, and the courage to be ourselves, even if it means not everyone will approve.
And that brings us to a really crucial point, which is that, even when we're living authentically and contributing to the world, we're still going to encounter people who disagree with us, who don't understand us,
Right.
or who simply don't like us.
Yeah, that's just part of life.
And that's where this courage to be disliked becomes essential.
Right. It's about recognizing that we can't please everyone.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
And that's okay.
But how do we deal with the hurt and the disappointment that can come from those inevitable moments of rejection or disapproval?
Yeah.
Does Adlerian psychology have anything to say about forgiveness?
That's a great question, and it's one that we'll dive into next time.
Okay.
As we explore the final chapters of The Courage to be Disliked.
Okay. I am definitely hooked.
Okay.
You've already covered so much ground,
We have.
but I can feel like there's still so much more to unpack.
Definitely.
So until next time, dear listener, I encourage you to contemplate this idea of contribution.
Mm-hmm.
Where can you be of service in your own unique way?
Yeah.
And how can you start to shift your focus from seeking recognition to finding fulfillment
Right.
in the act of giving itself?
Great question to ponder.
Okay, so we are back for the final part of our deep dive into The Courage to be Disliked. And man, this book has really challenged my thinking in ways I just did not expect.
It's a lot to process, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah, we've been talking about letting go of the past, embracing our imperfections, the importance of contribution.
Right.
A lot to take
Just a
in.
journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
And like any good journey, there are going to be some bumps along the way. And I think that's where this idea of forgiveness comes in.
Yeah, that's actually where we left off last time, talking about how, even when we're living authentically and trying to, make a positive impact, we're inevitably going to encounter people who, well, they rub us the wrong way, or they even hurt us.
They do.
So how do we deal with those situations?
Right.
Does Adlerian psychology just say oh, well, courage to be disliked, move on?
Not exactly.
Yeah.
It's not about being a doormat or denying our feelings. I think forgiveness in the Adlerian sense is more about recognizing that Holding on to anger and resentment
Yeah.
is ultimately harmful to us.
It's like that saying, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Exactly. It eats away at us from the inside.
Yeah.
And it keeps us stuck in the past, replaying those hurts over and over again.
So forgiveness is about freeing ourselves from that negativity.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do that?
Right.
Especially when you know someone has really wronged us.
Well, it starts with understanding that forgiveness isn't about condoning the other person's actions or letting them off the hook. It's about choosing to release the anger and resentment that we're carrying.
So it's not about them, it's about us.
It's about recognizing that we have a choice. We can choose to hold on to that pain and let it define us.
Yeah.
Or we can choose to let it go and move forward.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense intellectually.
Right.
But emotionally, it feels like a whole different ballgame.
It does.
Any tips on how to actually make that shift?
Well, the book suggests, separating the person from their actions.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that everyone makes mistakes and that those mistakes don't define their entire being.
So it's about seeing the humanity in the other person even when they've messed up.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about understanding that, their actions may stem from their own unresolved pain, their own insecurities, their own limiting beliefs. It doesn't excuse their behavior, but it allows for compassion.
That's a really powerful reframe.
Yeah.
It's like taking the focus off of blame and judgment and shifting it towards understanding and empathy.
Exactly.
Wow.
And when you can start to see things from that perspective, forgiveness becomes less about them and more about you reclaiming your own inner peace.
But does forgiving someone mean that you have to reconcile with them?
Yeah.
Or let them back into your life?
Not necessarily. Forgiveness is an internal process.
Okay.
It's about letting go of those negative emotions that are weighing you down. So you can choose to forgive someone without condoning their actions or continuing the relationship.
So it's about setting yourself free.
Yes.
Not about giving them a free pass.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming your power and choosing to move forward with your life unburdened by that negativity.
It's funny, we started this deep dive talking about how our past doesn't have to define us.
Right.
And now we're talking about letting go of those past hurts that we might be clinging to.
Yeah.
It seems like letting go is kind of a major theme in Adlerian psychology.
It is, letting go of the past, letting go of the need to control, letting go of that fear of being disliked.
Yeah.
It's all about creating space for something new to emerge.
And what emerges, according to Adler, is a life of meaning and purpose.
Yes.
But if we're not defining ourselves by our past or striving towards some future goal,
Right.
how do we find that meaning?
Right.
What's the point of it all?
That's the big question, right?
It is.
And Adler's answer is surprisingly simple. The meaning of life is to contribute to something larger than yourself.
But isn't that what we've been talking about this whole time?
Yes.
This idea of contribution.
It is, but I think it goes even deeper than that. It's not just about doing good deeds or helping others. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected.
Yeah.
And that our actions have this ripple effect on the world around us.
Just like that butterfly effect thing.
Exactly.
Even the smallest act of kindness can have a huge impact.
Right. And when we start living from that perspective, we begin to see our lives as part of this larger tapestry. We're not just these isolated individuals pursuing our own selfish goals.
Right.
We're all these threads woven together, creating something beautiful and meaningful.
Okay. That's a beautiful image.
Yeah.
But it also feels a little overwhelming.
It can.
If we're all interconnected and our actions have these far-reaching consequences, how do we even know where to begin?
Well, Adler would say, start right where you are,
Okay.
Look around your community, your family, your workplace. Where can you be of service?
Yeah.
Where can you offer your unique gifts and talents?
It doesn't have to be about, saving the world or making some grand gesture.
Right.
It's about showing up in those everyday moments.
Yeah.
And making a positive impact in whatever ways feel authentic to us.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's where the courage to be disliked comes full circle.
Okay.
Because when you're living in alignment with your values and contributing to something bigger than yourself, you're inevitably going to encounter people who don't understand or approve.
So it's about having the courage to be yourself, even if it means not everyone will like you.
Exactly.
And that's a pretty powerful message.
It is. It really is. And it's, I think, the essence of what the courage to be disliked is all about.
Yeah.
It's a call to embrace our imperfections, to let go of that need for approval.
Right.
And to create a life of meaning and purpose through our contributions to the world.
Well, I don't know about you, but I am feeling pretty inspired right now.
Me too.
This deep dive has been a wild ride, but I'm walking away with a whole new perspective on what it means to live a truly fulfilling life.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you, and I hope our listeners are feeling inspired
Yeah,
to embrace their own courage to be disliked and to create a life that is both meaningful and authentic.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. So, dear listener, as you go forth into the world, remember to be kind to yourself, to contribute in whatever ways feel right for you, and never be afraid to let your true self shine.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the courage to be disliked. Until next time.